Ableton Live 11 just dropped, and it's a super exciting time for Ableton users like myself. I've personally been using Pro Tools for a lot of my career, but I've always been using Ableton as well as a production and songwriting tool, making beats, etc. Now, the thing is, I've always been using Pro Tools for mixing, mastering, recording, and all kinds of stuff related to audio. Now, in this new version of Ableton, they've introduced a whole bunch of amazing new features that are geared towards people like me who are still using other DAWs for audio, and a whole bunch of other stuff, to be fair. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk all about these new features, my favorite features especially, and let you know whether or not you should consider buying or upgrading to Ableton 11 if you never have before. Are you ready? Let's go. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is your boy 5-Piece producer and engineer extraordinaire. Thank you for checking out today's video, and as always, if you haven't already, please hit the bell and subscribe button down below so you can stay tuned for more helpful videos. I drop something new every single week, always focused on recording, mixing, mastering, production, and more. If you want to sound better and make more money with your music, definitely subscribe to the channel so I can help you with those things. So in today's video, we're talking all about Ableton Live 11, some of the new features, some of my favorite features, and why you should consider upgrading or buying it if you haven't done so before. So let's start with the first thing, editing and comping. So Ableton has introduced a whole bunch of really cool features. Some of these features are not necessarily new to other DAWs, like Pro Tools has had this, but you now have the ability to link tracks, which I think is really cool. So for example, if I were to just take these three tracks, this melody, atmosphere, and flute, and I was to link them together like so, what's going to happen is now when I'm selecting one and making edits to it, it's going to ultimately make that same change on the other clips that are in that linked group. So for example, if I take this and pull it back, you see that the three tracks that are here, they've all now been reduced, right? So this is a really cool way to just edit a bunch of tracks at the same time. And this will happen sometimes when you're recording like a stereo pair of microphones, or maybe a drum kit, or basically any kind of audio, anything that's usually very similar, vocal takes, etc. Now, aside from linking tracks, what's really cool is Ableton allows you to actually record and comp audio in a new way. And what it allows you to do is it basically records your audio, and as it loops over, it creates a new pass or a new playlist, a new lane, I believe is what they call it. And you can also, ultimately, when you're done, you can see all the lanes and then comp your take by just selecting what you want and then, pressing enter and populating it into the main playlist, which is what you'll ultimately hear. So I'm going to record a little passive audio on the hook here, and we'll do that right now. So check this out. So now that I've recorded the take, of course it's non-destructive, so I could always just pull it back and, select and comp and copy and paste, and that's how you traditionally do it. But if I switch out of automation mode and I right-click on my audio channel, I can hit Show Take Lanes. And you see here it's showing me, the entire take, and then it's showing me the different parts and all that stuff. And what I could do is I can actually zoom in, and I could highlight the section I want and press enter. And you see it's now populating this top part, and it'll just change it and comp it together for me, choosing the parts that I've essentially selected. So it's a really helpful way to edit audio that's different from the past. I find this very helpful, and again, way better in Ableton now. This wasn't the case before. So if you're a Pro Tools user who thinks that, Pro Tools is superior at audio, which is pretty much what I've always been like, Ableton's slowly changing the game here and might be able to take that top spot with features like this. Now the thing is, again, you could apply this to MIDI as well. So if I were to just take this 808 and let's just create a whole new section here where I'll play the 808 on my keyboard. If I press record and I record over this loop, it's going to loop around. It's going to give me that same sort of option. So check this out. All right, so you see I've recorded that. If I right click, show take lanes, it's showing me all the passes that I just made. So now I can go in and I can take what I want, press enter, and ultimately compile a take. And then the second I'm done, I can get rid of show take lanes and my comp take is together. And the thing is too, if you want to just hear one of your takes in full, you can always press the speaker button and now it's going to let you hear that take on its own. So it's not like you're limited. You can still preview everything you're working on, but I think this is just a really cool way. In fact, a lot of people that I work with, a lot of students, they don't even realize that Ableton's non-destructive, which is an older feature that they implemented, which is where you could obviously pull this back. So that combined with this new feature, it just introduces a whole bunch of ways that you can edit audio and MIDI and create the perfect take for your song. Speaking of MIDI, they've introduced new ways of editing MIDI in Ableton, which is super helpful. So if I open up a MIDI clip here for this 808, for example, you're going to notice that this left section looks completely different. And you have your notes, your envelopes, and your note expression, which is a new feature that they didn't really have before. But these three sections are now laid out up here as opposed to in the bottom left, which is how it was previously. Now, they've introduced a couple of things related to MIDI. Of course, you got your standard double time, half time features, reverse, and all that stuff. But now they've introduced a randomize feature, which will help you randomize your velocity, for example. So if I were to just highlight, my clip here and then press randomize, you'll see that the velocity is now going to change. See how it's just changed up? So if I were to actually undo that and play this, then I'll redo it as it plays through, you're going to see how the velocity sounds different. So this is really cool. It introduces a whole bunch of new dynamic possibilities, and you can see here, you can choose the strength. So it's going to potentially, set up notes so that they hit as hard as that or less, depending on where you have it set up. So that's a really cool thing that they've done here. And again, just leads to some new creative possibilities that you may not have thought of on your own. Now the envelopes is pretty much, standard stuff here. But the note expression is something cool. I can't really get into this as much because I don't really have the ability to take advantage of these features. But if you have an MPE enabled device, you could take advantage of this stuff. It refers to like slide and pressure. So we're looking at like those rolly keyboards and stuff like that. Just a new way to express the notes and allow them to sound a little bit different. Ableton has all kinds of features tailored to that. I can't take advantage of these features personally, but I just wanted to point them out for anybody watching at home. Now, the other cool MIDI features that they've implemented is probability and chance. So you can actually increase or decrease the probability of a note happening. So you see it happening here at the bottom. It says chance, right? If I take this second note and I move it down, now there's a much less probability or chance that it's actually going to be heard. So let's see what happens here. See? So even though there's a note there, the probability of it happening is significantly less than it was before, so therefore you're not always hearing it. May not be the best idea to do this on an 808, even though I'm showing you this. You may want to try it on melodies and arpeggios and stuff like that. That'll be a really cool possibility. So let's just look at that real quick. If I go to another sound here, like this flute, and if I just expand this bottom, highlight everything, and I press randomize, you see it's sort of done the same thing. So the randomize doesn't just apply to velocity, it applies to whatever's selected here. And in this case, I'm choosing the probability or the chance of a note happening. And we're going to see how different this flute sounds. And I'll even solo it and play it with and without. So check this out. So you're not hearing certain notes, right? But now if I do it again, right? You get the idea. So you can see how this is just going to be changing the potential of what's being played or what's being heard. It's not always going to be heard at the same way as you originally programmed it. I think that's really cool. It just, can give you some new creative flair. Maybe even help you do something that you wouldn't have naturally done on your own, which is something that I really like about Ableton is some of these features and tools that allows me to just get outside of myself and do things that I wouldn't naturally do. Now, the other really helpful feature that this version of Ableton has is scale. So if I press the scale button when I'm in the MIDI editor, I can now choose the key and the scale. And they have a whole bunch of scales. Some of these I actually haven't even heard of, but it's just really interesting. So I can, choose C major. And then if I could fold my notes as I normally would, which is, just showing you what you've actually played on the keyboard. But if I hit scale, it's actually going to show me only notes that are in key with the scale that I've selected. This is really helpful for people who are not as solid with music theory. I know a lot of people that make music are not. They just love to make beats or program drums, etc. This is going to be a super huge game changer for those folks, because now you're going to be able to just lock yourself into a scale and simply draw in, your chord progressions and know that you're perfectly in key, that all your notes are going to make sense, assuming that you make the right choice in terms of your taste, right? But otherwise, you're going to not have to worry about playing the wrong thing that's going to be jarring. Everything is going to make musical sense in the context of your song. Another new thing that they implemented into Ableton is the different effects and how they're organized. So speaking of organization, the first thing you'll notice when you open up Ableton 11 is your audio effects. They're going to be displayed now under categories. Before they were just traditionally like, EQ8 and the actual plugin itself listed. Now you'll see there's a whole section, EQ and filters, and you expand that and you're going to find the EQ8 as well as other sounds. Dynamics, same sort of vibe. Everything is just categorized, which might make it easier for you to discover something or find something that you want to use, which I find really, really helpful. There are a few new plugins which are worth mentioning. You have the hybrid reverb, which is really cool. So if I put that on to this flute, for example, the hybrid reverb is essentially a combination of a convolution reverb. It has a built-in EQ, very flexible, and something that Ableton, I think, needed because they didn't have it before. But what's cool about it is you can drag a sample into the hybrid reverb, and it'll essentially emulate the environment that that sample is in. So if I just go in and I pull up anything like a hi-hat here, it's not going to play the hi-hat, but it's going to take the hi-hat, figure out the space that it's in, and create something similar to it. So check this out. I'm just going to play this with and without. With it. It can lead to just all kinds of different creative possibilities. I haven't put a whole lot of thought into what I'm choosing here, but you can understand how this might help influence the sound that you make. You could drag something in there that's really, really spacious, or something that's doesn't really make any sense, but lead to a cool creative possibility because the hybrid reverb is pulling from that. And the thing I like about it too is, again, it has that built-in EQ, so I could filter out low end, I can accentuate something in the high end, or pull out some mud in the low mids. All kinds of ways I can use it without having to actually call up a secondary EQ, which is extremely, extremely helpful. So another cool plugin they've introduced is the Spectral Time, which is a form of a delay plugin. And it just creates delays in an interesting way. So if I put it on here again, you're going to see a whole bunch of information populate here. Check this out. So it's, from what I understand, it's creating delays based on the frequency content, and it's even able to create certain harmonic content and create delays around that. Maybe I'm mistaken here, but that's just sort of what I'm understanding it to do. And it's got a cool freeze button, so you can create some cool glitchy sort of stuff. Let's check this out. Might be better on a more percussive sound, but still different ways to implement this to just create some cool little effects. The other plugin that they've introduced is the Spectral Resonator. So this is going to be looking at the frequency content and essentially creating resonance based on the frequencies that sound is comprised of. So this is again going to be something that will help create some cool glitchy or alternative worldly sort of sounding things depending on what you feed it, because ultimately the sound you feed it is what's going to, create that texture. So check this out. It's obviously sounding a little bit detuned and all that, and that's what this thing, is doing. It could be really cool on drums, so I might even actually take this right now, and let's put it on drums and see what happens. If I take this group of drums I have here, I'm just pretty much using the stock preset that it comes with, playing with the dry wet, but you can already see how it's sort of creating this glitchy sort of sound. It could be really cool on lo-fi or just, anything where you want to add a little bit more flair to that particular instrument part. Now, those are some of the new effects, but Ableton, of course, has introduced or reintroduced some of their old effects, but with some new looks. So one of them, for example, is the Redux. So if you look at the Redux now, it has a built-in dry wet knob, and it also has this jitter functionality, which I don't believe was there in previous versions. You can still, of course, reduce the bits on a sound, but the dry wet and this other stuff really helps out. So check this out. You can see how these two sounds combined already are creating something really unique and different, and definitely something really glitchy, maybe even industrial sounding. There are a few other effects that they've definitely changed up. So for example, the chorus Ensemble looks a little bit different, updated look, but still the same great sound, just a few additional things or a few, switch ups in terms of the appearance. Same with the Phaser-Flanger, looks a little bit different, cooler UI, but still delivering that same classic sound that we're all familiar with from previous versions of Ableton. Another thing that Ableton Live 11 has updated is the macros. If I show the macros here, you can see that I'm only seeing a couple, and I think there's up to 8 from the previous version if I'm not mistaken. But now what you could do is you could press this plus sign to add more and show more. There's still a limit, but this is significantly better. You can map a whole bunch of stuff here, any kind of parameter you want, frequency, etc. And what's cool is too, you can also press this random button to select some new things or set some different levels that you normally wouldn't set up. So for example, if I set up just a few things here, you see they're all set to a predetermined level. Of course, I could change them, whatever, but if I press random, it's now going to randomize the setting that it's on, and that might yield some cool and creative effects that otherwise weren't available. So aside from effects and functionality, another thing that Ableton has fixed up or switched up is the UI in a couple of different ways. Now, we're traditionally used to looking at our CPU meter in the top right-hand corner of the screen. You see I'm using about 25% on average, and that might go up or down depending on what elements come in. But that's pretty much what we've been used to seeing and determining, how much of our RAM and CPU are we using at a given time. But what's cool is if I press tab and I flip to my other view here, I could press this little button at the bottom and it's going to show me which channels are actually using the most CPU. So you can see here that this flute has quite a bit of stuff going on and it's using a lot of CPU even when we're not playing the song. And if I were to play the song, we'll actually see for sure what is using up a lot of the CPU. And if it is problematic, I can of course right click and then freeze that track, flatten that track, and take care of it in a way that's not going to use as much CPU moving forward. Now let's talk about templates. Ableton Live always had an issue with templates. They only allowed you to save one as your default template, and that's problematic, especially for a person like me. In Pro Tools, I have like 20 different templates I use for a variety of reasons, ranging from production to recording to mixing and mastering to just mastering to audio post-production for film, all kinds of stuff. Well, Ableton Live 11 has solved that problem with this new templates folder, and it's really simple. Just create your session as you like, add the stuff that you want, and you can, of course, just hit the save under file. You're going to go to save live set as template, and it'll populate under here. This is super, super helpful. You'll now just have your template that you can double click and basically create a new session from that template, or if you have a new session, just open up that template in the session and just get right to work. You can cover a whole lot of bases, and this is super overdue, but I'm glad that they finally introduced this feature. So there's still so many features that I haven't covered yet. I'm still exploring Ableton, but one last feature I want to identify for you guys is their transposition feature. If you're somebody who likes to write in a particular song key and you're just stuck in that key all the time, transposing is something that you probably want to do later on. So for me, I might write a song in A minor or C minor or C major or whatever, because those keys I'm very comfortable with. But then when I go to hand it off to another artist, what I like to do is I like to, repitch the whole song, transpose the whole song to a different key that's better suited to that artist because maybe they can't sing in the key that I write in, etc., etc. So what's really cool is you can actually take all of your MIDI in a session and transpose it all at once. Before, you'd have to do this one at a time or find a workaround. But now what's cool is I can literally highlight all the MIDI in a session. Like I could double click this track, for example, and I could highlight all the MIDI a part of it. And now I'm going to see all the MIDI, as you could see. And I can actually highlight everything in this clip and just press the up button once, for example, and I've shifted it up a semitone. If I want to just focus on one track, I could press this focus, and the track that I have originally selected, it's going to just show that, and I can move that on its own. If I have focus deselected, I could see everything that I've grabbed or highlighted in the session, which is super helpful. So again, this is really great if you write in a specific key and want to change that key later with as little effort as possible. Me personally, I would always have to go into each individual clip, highlight, shift it up one, and make sure I did that for every single clip. Otherwise, when I played it, it would be a complete train wreck and sound like, 5 different keys happening at one time. Now, there's a whole bunch of features that I didn't discuss. This is not meant to be like a fully all-encompassing video, but this is some really great stuff that Ableton has done here. I'm really excited. To be honest, just a few months ago, I was running Ableton 9. Now I'm on 11, so I went to 10 for a brief period and jumped right to 11 because I got a free upgrade when I purchased 10 in the winter time. And I'm just really stoked about all these features and exploring them. You might be wondering like, well, they didn't add any sounds. Yeah, they did. I use a lot of third-party stuff, so it doesn't really affect me. But there are a whole bunch of packs that they have available for Ableton users. I've installed a couple of here, like the pitch loop and the orchestral woodwinds and stuff like that. But there's a whole bunch that you'll find on Ableton's website. But really, I'm not focused on that. I'm focused mostly on the features and how we can use this to make better music, make better beats, produce better songs, etc. Now, if you're somebody who's thinking about getting Ableton Live 11, definitely recommend it. If you already have a previous version, you can just pay for the upgrade. It should be a little bit cheaper than buying it outright. If you've never used any DAW, period, highly recommend Ableton Live 11. I've put a lot of people onto it, and once people kind of grasp it, especially folks coming from like a DJ background and stuff like that, you can really grab Ableton and figure it out. It just does things way better and way easier than a lot of other DAWs. And not only that, the things that you do in Ableton, they are able to translate into a lot of DAWs, which I find difficult with other ones. So, for example, a lot of people love FL. I also like FL. I think FL is really great, but I find FL does a lot of things in a very unique way that doesn't always translate. Whereas when I'm working in Ableton, as long as I know what I'm trying to do, I can figure out how to do it inside of Pro Tools, inside of Logic, etc. And I think that's a really important consideration if you're a producer or beat maker or songwriter that's looking to collaborate with other people. So definitely recommend Ableton Live 11. I'm going to keep playing around with it. I've only been playing with it for a few days, but I'll give you some more insight and review around this as the weeks go by. Maybe I'll shoot some more content. And if you want to see anything specific, you want me to see me talk about anything in particular, leave a comment below so I can shoot something specifically for you. If you got value out of this video, please smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'm looking forward to helping you guys again soon. Peace.
5,